all the learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is Role of State in Era of Globalization. In this lecture, we shall discuss the concept of globalization with reference to the causes and its effect. We shall elaborate on the impact of globalization on various realms with a particular focus on state activities. We shall discuss the issues with reference to various academic work, books and their insights to elaborate on this very significant topic of role of state in era of globalization. This topic is of immense significance for the learners from the discipline of political science, international relations, sociology, international business, media studies, governance studies, policy studies, amongst others. To begin with, we all know that globalization is one of the most debated issues. And to add to that, whenever we hear the word globalization, it is a very complex phenomenon. The process of globalization has a huge bearing with reference to several dynamics, with reference to several academic disciplines. And to add to that, within its interface with several disciplines, it is a process, it's an idea, it's a concept which has so many multifaceted dimensions attached to it. To begin with, how do we define globalization? Let's take reference to a work that was done in 1999, that is the United Nations Development Program report. Now, the UNDP defines globalization as interdependence of world's people, integrating not just the economy but culture, technology and governance. People everywhere are becoming connected, affected by events in far corners of the world. So what we see here is that as we dwell further into the dynamics of globalization and we take inputs from United Nations Development Program Human Development Report 1999. Now, this book, this work, this report tells us that when we try to understand globalization in the contemporary times, we have to understand new markets, that is markets and services, banking, insurance, transport. We have to understand that how deregulated financial markets are. Further, these markets are 24/7. Then we find that there is deregulation of competition laws, global markets with global branding. Then when we look at globalization from the perspective of people, the actors involved in it, this UNDP report of 1999, the Human Development Report, points out that there are new actors. Now, what are the new actors? Multinational corporations, World Trade Organization, international NGOs, regional blocs like European Union, policy coordinating groups like G8, G77, OECD, amongst others. Further, looking at the fact that how services are getting changed, the nature of trading is becoming complex with multiple actors, there are new rules and norms also with globalization. And once again, the UNDP 1999 Human Development Report tells us that there are market economic policies with reference to new rules and norms, adoption of democracy, human rights conventions, environmental conventions, multinational agreements in trade, multilateral services, intellectual property and communications, multinational agreement on investments, amongst others. Then with reference to globalization, what are the tools driving globalization? From internet to cellular telephones, computer aided designs, and in the present form, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, there are several important tools guiding globalization. Now, with the inputs that we just had from UNDP report of 1999, the Human Development Report, it is essential to see that what the report pointed out then, how important it is with reference to the present time. And to elaborate further on it, we take reference to another report, that is from United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs World Public Sector Report, and the report title is titled as globalization and the state. Let us understand what does this report tell us. When we try to understand globalization, it has various characteristics. It is not a new phenomenon. It dates back to Roman, Hellenic and the Persian empires. Then when we look at the 19th and the 20th century, it has become more in the modern times, and this is through technologies. That is when we see telegraph, railways, invention of steam engine, all of it did give a boost to trading, exchange of goods between people and nations. In the contemporary times, there is increased global integration and interdependence. There is little consensus, no doubt, about the degree of integration, and this is why globalization is a contested phenomena. There are people who talk positives and advantages of globalization, but at the same time, the other side also, there are voices that talk about the disadvantages of globalization. Then it is pervasive, at the same time there is uncertainty too about the pervasiveness of globalization. And then it is asymmetrical, imperfect, and there definitely needs commitment to improve. Now, when we look at these inputs about global integration and interdependence from United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs World Public Sector Report, this is in 2001. What we see here is that how this report also talks about the multi-dimensional character. That is, globalization is about transformational change with adverse effects. There are economic, political, social, cultural dimensions attached to it. It is characterized by unprecedented rapid flow of goods and services, as the report points out, circulation of ideas, emergence of new social and political movement. Now, further, when we look at the key actors with reference to globalization, the report points out that predominantly the United States, Western Europe, Japan, they are the main actors. Main actors, part of G8, they account for nearly 80% of capital, and this is as per 2001 statistics offered by the World Public Sector Report, and that how nation state and the role of government is no doubt critical. Now, after having understood that what does globalization actually imply with reference to inputs from various reports, let's take inputs from some important work done in the realm of international relations on globalization, which indeed have a very significant bearing on the topic role of state in era of globalization, at the same time an important bearing with reference to its impact on contemporary scenario. Jean Artskold's work, Globalization, A Critical Introduction, opines that globalization has various notions. By looking at globalization as internationalization, that is, it can be an adjective to describe cross-border relations between countries. Further, looking at various notions that globalization as liberalization, in this aspect, globalization refers to a process of removing government-imposed restrictions on movement between countries in order to create an open, borderless world economy. Further, in debating on notions, looking at globalization as universalization, global is used in the sense that is universal, that is worldwide, and globalization is the process of spreading various objects and experiences to people at all corners of the earth. While looking at globalization as westernization or modernization, the focus is that how certain social structures of modernity, namely capitalism, rationalism, industrialism, they are spread all world over, and pre-existing cultures and local self-determination in the process are somewhere subordinated. Then there is another notion of globalization as deterritorialization. That is, the focus here is on supra-territoriality, the idea of trans-world, trans-border relations. Now, with these various notions of globalization, Jean Artskold tells us that globalization, though it has been widely understood and grasped in spatial terms, that is, globalization in the definition of Jean Artskold, it is a transformation of social geography marked by the growth of supra-territorial spaces, but dear learners, In this work, Jean Ascol also points out that territoriality and supraterritoriality that we often complement and associate with globalization coexist in complex interrelations. Anthony Giddens has defined globalization as the intensification of worldwide social relations where local happenings are shaped by events occurring many miles away and vice versa. Further, to add to our academic and other understanding, the work of David Held points out that globalization is a process which embodies a transformation in the spatial organization of social relations and transactions generating transcontinental or inter-regional flows and networks of activity. Now, after having discussed the ambit of globalization, let us now move towards what are its impact on the state. And for this also, we will take reference from some of the academic work that has been done in this regard. The work of M. Shaw, that is Theory of the Global State, Globality as an Unfinished Revolution. This work has some important insights, and we quote, "States were created to be sovereign, but now, due to globalization, often give their sovereignty away to pooling in, that is, increasingly similar jurisdiction across states, and to power being seen as economic rather than political progress." Further, important inputs come from the work of Baylis and Smith. The name of the work, The Globalization of World Politics, an Introduction to International Relations. In this work, there is a chapter that points out that what are the important reasons for change in the role of state when we try to debate globalization. Rise of interdependence, rise of non-state actors, increased use of internet, technological advancements are all these factors that affect the role of the state. And how? Because state can no longer control the all-inclusive state language or education, because when we see that at the same time how there is rise of internet, global mass media, which controls the information dynamics also. The state no longer controls currency, quoting from the work of John Baylis and Steve Smith, because of intangible assets and importation as well as online and electronic banking and a shared currency in many states, like example that of European Union. So what we see here is that how, because of these dynamics of globalization, somewhere because of additional inputs in the context of global governance like technology, non-state actors, role of state definitely is questioned. Now there is an argument, has globalization reduced the importance of state? And another argument says yes, it may have influenced the role of the state, yet one cannot ignore that states are still most important actor in the governance dynamics. Globalization has changed the role of state in many ways. Politically, if you look at how, interdependence, independence of states, and as we just discussed that today's security is multidimensional. There is rise of new security threats, example, climate change, global warming, pandemics, technological disruption, all of which have a bearing on governance processes of various nation states. Further, when we are discussing globalization, we also have to understand that it has given rise to the apparatus of world economy, the global trade and the financial apparatus comprising of online banking, stock markets, global franchises, new forms of economic relations. But at the same time, when we are debating this globalization, we cannot dismiss that there is an added disadvantage, that how the rich countries get more benefits at the expense of the poor countries. The big debate, that is global developed north versus developing and underdeveloped south. Now, when we are trying to understand state with special focus towards the process of globalization, State in international relations as well as at the domestic apparatus level is defined by sovereignty. To elaborate further on the concept of state sovereignty, we take reference to the Peace of Westphalia. It was signed in the year 1648. Why it was signed? Because if we go by the accounts of world history, the 30 Years' War in the Holy Roman Empire and the 80 Years' War between the Spain and the Dutch Republic. Now, this Peace of Westphalia ended the 30 and the 80 Years' War. And at the same time, why it is significant? Because it created the framework for modern international relations. Why is Peace of Westphalia important for IR? Because it strengthened nations since they could now enter into foreign alliances, work out treaties, decide significant topics and matters such as peace and war. And then in the similar argument, this Peace of Westphalia served as an important diplomatic model for resolving disputes between warring nations. The Westphalian sovereignty, the Westphalian system that we are talking about is very essential to the topic of role of state in era of globalization. To that we first understand what is the Westphalian system. It is a global system based on the principle of international law that each state has sovereignty over its territory and domestic affairs to the exclusion of all external powers and on the principle of non-interference in another country's domestic affairs. Now, the argument in contemporary times with a special focus on globalization is that Westphalian system is being challenged or Westphalian system whether it's changing. Now, let's take arguments from the work of Stephen Krasner, very significant work compromising Westphalia from international security. Now, this work points out that the key feature of the Westphalian system is that authority is based on territory. This work points out that violations of the Westphalian model occur in various ways. And what are they? Conventions, contracting, coercion and imposition. Now, these four models, the four modes differ by whether the behavior of one actor depends on that of another and by whether at least one of the actors is better off and none worse off. In conventions, rulers enter into agreements, that is human rights, an example here, for which they expect some gain, but their behavior is not contingent on what others do. In contracting, rulers agree to violate Westphalian principle, but only if they are provided with such benefits such as foreign loan. Now, this is where dynamics of globalization come into existence, that how globalization, which is defined as liberalization, the state somewhere then adjusts itself to work out its international obligations in supranational governance models. Further, the work of Stephen Krasner points out that in case of coercion, the rulers of stronger states make the weaker ones worse off by engaging in incredible threat to which the target might or might not acquiesce. In imposition, the target is too weak, that is, has no option but to comply with the preferences of the stronger. Essential here to point out that in the conclusion, Krasner gives several reasons why violation of Westphalia are not necessarily bad and at times can be good. For example, how some of the weak are incapable of governing their own population and are threats to international stability as well. The population of these states, if their rulers, would be better off if Westphalia component is compromised. Example here that many third world countries are incapable of independently implementing reasonable economic policies. For them, conditionality is a good thing, even if it's inconsistent with the Westphalian model. So, the broad aspects that we get from this work of Stephen Krasner here is that when we look at globalization, especially rise of new conventions, yes, when we try to understand this work with reference to globalization, when state is a contracting party to various international law, regulations, and that how at times supranational governance model even coerces the state to agree to its term, and then there is at times idea that how the supranational governance model imposes new restriction on the state. So, in all these aspects that Krasner discusses, conventions, contracting, coercion and imposition, globalization can be looked upon as an important case study. So, what we see here is that globalization as a process which had existed since various phases of human civilization, in the present time it has definitely increased with reference to its scale, speed, time and reach. In this aspect, it definitely has a bearing on the functioning of the state. It definitely has a bearing with reference to the idea of state sovereignty in global governance. Though globalization presents new challenges for state, however, one cannot dismiss the fact that both at domestic as well as international level, the state remains the important actor. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.